Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And if you're joining us from Seattle, it's good morning. I think it's about 8 in the morning at the moment. Is that right, Steve?
Right, it's 8 a.m.
Still early. I'm still wiping the sleep out of your eyes. If you're in the Qualtrics offices in downtown Seattle, you're probably taking advantage of their very generous breakfast snack selection in their offices. And I know each time I've visited there, that's what I've done if I've gone in early in the morning. So my name's Manza Mohammed. I'm a co-founder of Capacitas. We are big believers that systems with great performance inevitably use less capacity, which means they tend to cost less in the cloud. But importantly, if engineering has got the mindset of delivering systems which have better performance, over the long term, you tend to have systems that are more predictable in terms of reliability, performance, and scale, and also cost over the long term. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Steve Jang, Chief Architect of Qualtrics. Before I do a brief intro of Qualtrics and introduce Steve, I'll just do a couple of housekeeping points. First is this audio event is about 45 to 50 minutes. We'll absolutely encourage you to ask questions. I'm sure Steve and myself will be absolutely delighted to answer any questions, and hopefully that can that means that you'll get the most value out of today's audio event. So let me just talk about Qualtrics. So Qualtrics is a global brand. It's a 2 billion revenue SaaS company. And you might think of Qualtrics as just a survey company, but it's so much more than that. They are an experience company, and they not only do they collect survey data, but they collect data on what you're saying in social media, on calls. And from that, they actually understand what customers are actually thinking about the experiences they are having with some of the largest brands in the world. So companies such as Delta Airlines. And just to put some perspective on the level of scale on the architecture and the platform that Steve looks after that supports that, they have about 15 billion personas. So that's about 2 personas for every man, woman, and child on planet Earth. They're processing about 150 million surveys a month, and all that data has to be processed and understood so that the enterprises can act on that. I've known Steve for a couple of years now as they started their cloud journey, and I've been involved in their cloud optimization journey along with the rest of the Capacitas team. What's really impressive about Steve is that he actually understands the Qualtrics architecture so well. It's so complex. It's a phenomenal achievement to understand it. And what I really like about Steve is he's super intelligent and super thoughtful. And I remember in our early conversations where he changed his position on an approach in terms of architecture and how to solve that problem based on the data he saw. So I think that's a very admirable quality. But what I also really like about Steve is no matter how hectic things get, he keeps a level head. So he is a man you want to have with you when you're in a crisis. So Steve, I've done a brief introduction to yourself and Qualtrics. Maybe if I hand it over to you, you can talk a bit more about Qualtrics yourself and maybe how you started your journey in using microservices at Qualtrics, and maybe some of the challenges.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mansoor, for the generous introduction there. Yeah, as you mentioned, hello everyone. I'm excited to be part of this conversation. So yeah, as you mentioned, I live in Seattle. Just as a personal introduction, I lived in Seattle area and worked here for the last 30 years. I'd say the first 10 years was working on operating systems. That's when that kind of jobs existed back in the 90s. Working at GeoWorks and Microsoft, we were actually adding TCP/IP stack to the operating system at GeoWorks at the time, and so forth. It was kind of interesting, really exciting times as well back in the 90s. The next 10 years or so, working on distributed systems, working at Hulu, White Pages, and Cumulo was the last company I worked at before Qualtrics. We were building distributed file systems there at Cumulo. And really the last 10 years have been Qualtrics. So I joined Qualtrics back in 2015, and believe it or not, we only had about 70 engineers back in that time frame, right? And now we have more than 1,100, and as you can imagine, it was hyper growth, a very kind of an interesting journey, both personally and organizationally, where we grew at that speed. And in fact, we are still hiring in Seattle and around the world. So if you're looking for a new role, I would recommend talking to Qualtrics still.
Well, is this a good time for me to mention the breakfast snack selection, lunch snack selection that you offer in your offices?
Yeah. We actually have a pretty good benefits, I'd say. In fact, one year, the CEO just kind of decided to give everyone a experience that they want to have every year, and so he also like promised $1,500, so that you can like fund your trip to have an experience, and that's stuck. We still have, the $1,500 extra. Okay, so maybe this is not important, but so good benefits, food, drinks, and everything. Beer. We have beer at the office as well,
And a great view of the ocean.
and great view of the sound. Um, so yeah, I oversee the architecture direction at Qualtrics, and also have a small team that tackles some strategic engineering initiatives. But yeah, no, I would say this all this have been really amazing over the last 30 years. We couldn't have imagined all the AI and stuff like that, from back then. We didn't even have internet, right? So it's amazing how much things have changed, as all of us in the industry know, right? And the excitement cease to expand, doesn't never cease to exist. So let me also talk a little bit about Qualtrics. Qualtrics is not a household name, and this is because it's a B2B business. Qualtrics helps large and small enterprises gather human experience data from their customers and employees, and really help them understand how people feel about their products, services, brands, or any other topics that the enterprises really care about. And this is by listening to many different channels, as Mansoor mentioned earlier. So, when you have a conversation with a support staff, all that conversation is recorded, analyzed, and then social networks, of course, that's also ingested. Surveys, web impressions, those things are tracked, and even physical appointments and visits, and people's experience at the doctor's office. These kind of things all turn into operational event, and they're ingested into Qualtrics, and we pull them all together into a data analytics system. We analyze and generate insights and turn them into business workflows that sometimes solve the issues in the moment, often automated and integrated back to our customers' IT systems, but also through systemic changes in the organization based on data from Qualtrics. So if you imagine doing something like this at large consumer brands like Hilton or Delta Airlines or BMW or even Microsoft, it's Qualtrics, helping them do that. Obviously, every business is very, very different when it comes to their approach to operationalize their customer, contact and services. So every business is different, and that's what Qualtrics does. We make sure that our systems scale and adapt to the custom needs of our big enterprise partners working together, and provides reliability and security to be able to do that. So next time you get an online survey, check if it's coming from Qualtrics. It's very likely that it will be if it's from a large enterprise.
Yeah, I think it's an important point there that you raised. It's from you're listening to multiple channels or multiple conversations, not just what you put in the survey. It's what is said in other channels to actually really understand what the customer experience. I think, and that's one thing I never fully appreciated when I first started working with you guys.
Yeah. So should we talk about microservices?
I think so. That's what the audience came to listen to, or we could talk about the excellent perks you have at Qualtrics. But let's maybe talk about microservices.
The recruiting event? No, it's not. Yes, microservices. That's the topic of today. I think there is a very relevant connection to that background that we just gave with this microservice architecture. In fact, we've been doing that for the last 10 years. We've used microservice architecture over the last 10 years. And as I mentioned, we have a fairly large surface area in terms of functionality. So, there's that many different capabilities that we need to build, and therefore why we needed so many people working in engineering to implement all that. So really, microservice supported this hyper growth and large surface area very well, because we were adding all these teams, and the driving principle over the years really have been to empower each team and let them work in a very autonomous way. So if you look at, let's say, an engineering org of about 1,000 people, 100, 120 teams working independently, releasing code every day, at whatever frequency that they choose, microservices fit very well with this model, as long as every team abides by a few principles like zero downtime deployment, and just keeping things backward compatible. So in fact, I think one thing I can say about microservices is that it has actually improved our reliability over time.
You're right, yeah.
I can probably talk about this now because it was 10 years ago, but when I joined, there were production like 7 incidents every week. So we didn't get very much sleep during those times, and things were a lot more monolithic back then. Even with this 1,000+ engineers working on code, we experience rarely these days any incident that affects the and creates a site-wide outage, right? Every time somebody changes it, just a little bit changes, and we can always roll back easily.
So it's really it's the small changes, and when they make the change, the blast zone is relatively small anyway. So even if it is an error, probably doesn't go. It doesn't get picked up as an obvious incident.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously there are good ways and bad ways of doing microservices, right? If you had to coordinate multiple teams and multiple microservices to do the release every time, now, that would be actually less reliable.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
yeah, if you can keep the dependencies reasonable, and I actually am not aware of any major teams at Qualtrics that regularly waits on other teams before they delete, deploy or anything like that. So that's a good sign. I mean, that's I think a good sign.
the, I, I think that's like a common theme with tech companies, especially in the US, is this autonomy for you give the individual engineering teams.
Yeah.
And so the architecture supports that autonomy.
Yeah, definitely. Microservice does support that, and it has been a successful approach for us for a long time. But when it comes to architecture, it's always never all good or all bad, right? I mean, there's always trade-offs, and we've actually learned a lot, by taking this approach over the last 10 years.
Maybe you can touch on. Obviously, there's a good things, autonomy, improved reliability. But what are some of the trade-offs you could maybe talk
Yeah.
about?
Yeah, so I would say, by definition, the number of moving parts is actually an issue, right? In this day
Yeah.
and age, you need to have very good control and governance over your software that's going to production if you're an enterprise company. And it's challenging enough to do that with every service. And if you have so many different components, I think that's where the challenge is. And the other challenge is because of all these separation of functionality across many build pipelines and deployments, enforcing some sort of a company-wide standards uh,
Mhm.
becomes that much harder if unless you've actually engineered your infrastructure in such a way that those concerns can be segregated into the infrastructure layer, service mesh type of things, for
Yeah.
example, right? So I think there are definitely also challenges just because the sheer number of components that you end up with. Yeah.
And so there's kind of challenges with the sheer number of components, and with Qualtrics' own journey, you moved to the cloud. What did that, with that challenge and number of components in the move to the cloud, did that make that challenge better, or worse, or
Right.
no difference?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think yeah, you guys came in, and we worked over the last couple of years here. So uh, let me actually step back a little bit and explain the
Yeah.
journey here a little bit. We've used cloud for a very long time before we just last year. We actually abandoned all our colos and completely moved into AWS cloud. But our journey has been fairly long process. We started with completely 100% colo based infrastructure. When I
Mhm.
joined, we had data centers, 5 or 6 data centers around the world, and we had a small operations team that was managing all the physical hardware in that. And the only way to make this kind of thing work is to really try to leverage the economy of scale when you're owning your own hardware. You can't really manage too many variations of hardware, for
Yeah.
example. So I remember us sort of really standardizing on a couple of Dell models to in our data centers. We had like a Dell PowerEdge 430 and 440 servers everywhere, and we just use that for everything. use it for application services, but also databases. everything. I mean, so that was the way that we used to run things. And obviously, this is very capital expense type of arrangement. We do capacity planning and expand hardware fleet. But then, as you mentioned, I didn't think about it that way when you said, in fact, you said 15 million personas, but it's actually like 20 billion.
Sorry, I got it wrong. Sorry.
20 billion profiles in our directory, and I never thought about it in comparison to the world population. But obviously, the reason that we have that many is because we have about 20,000 enterprise customers, and each have their namespace, and each keep track of the context for their customers, right? So anyway, when we have to scale out at that scale, we had to start using things like DynamoDB and S3. It's a huge challenge in of itself to manage horizontally scaling storage like that on your own. And more and more we sort of operated in this hybrid model for years. And in fact, we at one point we actually moved pretty much every single physical data centers close to the AWS data centers, so that we can use direct connect and reduce the latency to their managed services. So we've been operating like that for a long time, and we moved into cloud just last year. So when it comes to microservices, even when we were managing our microservices in physical data centers, we had virtualization. Obviously, we used Docker, for that long. But it was basically, it was about capital expenditure, right? And teams would do capacity planning and get allocation of their hardware. And once it's allocated, it's basically a static resource that they own, so they can do what they want with it. We looked at the efficiency, but it wasn't a major concern. But once we moved into cloud, whereas before you just paid for your machine and it gets amortized over 5 years,
and you forgot about it.
We kind of we have better things to worry about that than going and trying to keep back the hardware we already bought. But in the cloud, you are paying for every hour of your resource that you're using. So unless you really care about your efficiency, you can really have an impact on the bottom line, so your margin and operational expenditure. So this does hit the bottom line. And therefore, with microservices especially, we really need to look at in aggregate how efficient our services are running and whether they are fully leveraging the compute. And so, we are working with companies like Capacitas to optimize and improve our efficiency and performance. And I really appreciated your approach there, Mansoor, in terms of, not just thinking about everything in terms of cost optimization only.
That's right.
Of course, that's the result, but really thinking about performance and the architecture, the operational shape of your traffic and CPU usage, and try to use that to optimize efficiency.
Yeah, I think the end result is a cost reduction, but the starting point was to make the system more performant and predictable, and so that is like a starting point. We've had a question in from Swapnil. I don't know, maybe this is a bit early, but still, let's just pick up these questions as they come in.
Yeah.
How is artificial intelligence influencing the design, development, and management of microservices and monolithic architectures? And what role is AI expected to play in the future of software architecture? Wow, that's great questions.
Right. Yeah, it is a great question. And it's interesting. So first of all, I think every enterprise company is racing to really adapt to this new revolutionary, really, change in the industry based on generative AI. And in that process, when you're trying to add agentic functionality to your platform, you can obviously start implementing that using agentic framework like a LangGraph or these techniques. But then underlying that is the actual software functionality and platform that you're using to realize the agentic use cases, right? So there are interesting standards that are coming up, like MCP and even A2A type of protocols. In the end, all the software is no use unless you can make it available to agents to really leverage them accurately. And also, and that's actually one of the first things that I think everybody's talking about. What level of MCP interface that you would provide for agentic work. But the flip side of it is this: using AI to access existing platform functionality can actually change the pattern of usage as well. Whereas before, there's certain human limit to how much of your platform a person could use, right? But with the enablement of AI, a lot of those things will be automated, and of course, there is this sort of undeterminism that comes with it as well. Is that a word?
No, it sounds like it should be a word, though. Undeterminism.
Indeterminism, I think. And just because of that, I think we need to actually really even improve the reliability and accuracy of the underlying infrastructure. It's not on the other side of that platform is not a human developed software that's been tested and built and monitored by people. It's AI agent that is sort of kind of guessing based on your MCP interface or the API documentation to try to interface with the platform. So I think better interface and and just more robustness of the platform is needed, I think. I guess that's a personal opinion.
Well, I don't think it's just a personal opinion. I think it's a trend because Satya at Microsoft, when they announced the layoffs, it was quite sad news a few weeks ago. He actually said for them, the North Star is making sure the products and platforms will be able to support those new AI workloads. And so they're doubling down on making sure the quality and the reliability and security of those platforms can support that. So I think what you're saying, Steve, I think it's probably a view that's held quite widely.
Yeah, but I also need to also mention the effect that AI has on coding. So a lot of people are excited about the productivity that AI coding can give us, and I think this is also a very interesting area where as we move forward with this platform reliability work or standardization work, what can AI do to help them, right? Instead of just working on a isolated feature, well-defined product functionality being built by AI. I'm more interested in how can we use AI to make sweeping changes in large code bases or multiple repositories at the same time. And therefore, this is kind of very interesting thought experiment here. When we had thousands of these components, it was virtually impossible for me to go and, hey, let's actually change the standard to across these many components. But I'm really fascinated by the possibility that maybe AI can automate these kind of making changes across many code bases at the same time.
That's an interesting thought experiment, because you could argue if you got 1,000 microservices, well, with AI, you could actually create coordination and do mass change. I think, is that what you're kind of suggesting?
Yeah. So I mean, if you think about, for example, just Java, Java version upgrade, I'm sure there are some components that are running pretty old Java versions, right? I'm sure even at Qualtrics. There was an interesting sort of an announcement from AWS when I was at reInvent, actually even like a couple of years ago, where they actually just assigned a couple of developers to go around and upgrade Java from like older version, Java 11 to, the current 2021 or 24 probably is the latest. And those just a couple developers could I think take care of like a couple thousand different code bases, using AI to upgrade Java. So this kind of work, I think, is really interesting, because now that's, really the kinds of productivity that are pragmatic that we can expect from developers going forward.
I've had another question come in here. What were some of the struggles in your cloud cost before working with Capacitas? Have you implemented some FinOps practices or initiatives for engineering teams to do on a regular basis? That's from Stephen, sorry, by the way.
Gotcha. Yeah, right. Okay. So I guess we are just getting into Q&A right away.
Sorry, I'm just picking them up while
No, I'm not complaining. I'm just joking. So yeah, obviously we worked with Capacitas to actually, yeah, struggled is a word. As mentioned, we have about 120 teams, and I'll just to give you a quick sense of the scale, we have about couple thousand, 3,000 different moving parts in each of our data center regions. We have about 10 different, regions around the world. And each of them have to be examined and optimized, theoretically, right? So and that has been the challenge because of the microservice architecture. By the way, we are also moving everything into Kubernetes. In the past, we've used something called Nomad. It's another sort of a container orchestration framework, but a simpler one. And we are moving to Kubernetes. Obviously, we weren't doing much of a auto scaling before with at our colos. And now that we are on AWS, elastic computing is actually something that we can leverage. So we are using EKS and moving all the so that's one of the major efforts that's going on, is to move from a little bit more, not that Nomad is incapable, but just the way that we set up in our colos, we really didn't have auto scaling, approach. Because at the end of the day, as I was saying, it's all about capex when you're in colos. So it's your hardware one way or the other. But in AWS, we are moving to EKS, and we are putting in place auto scaling. And in terms of FinOps practices, I mean, this is actually kind of another probably topic that we can spend, probably hours talking about this. But I think really direction there is we're really trying to connect the business needs and business values to where we spend money, right? So in order for us to really come to terms with how effectively are we actually spending our operational budget, we are looking into calculating something like cost to serve by interaction. So Qualtrics, it's a lot of our operations are based on how many interactions do we process between the enterprise and customers. So, how much does it cost with our current architecture and operational posture to support one interaction? So that's one of the FinOps conundrums that we've been grappling with. But then we go a little bit deeper than that from the FinOps perspective by looking at unit cost by different domains. So we have, I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but the way that we manage our microservices by sort of grouping them into functional domains. And we have about 34 different domains within our platform that we manage separately. And, thinking about what is the unit cost per domain. For example, if you're talking about communication domain, what is the unit cost for sending an email, basically? We send about 1 billion email per month. So, really thinking about what is the overhead of sending an email or SMS, and really the measure for that engineering team, measure of efficiency for them is, okay, what is the cost of an SMS or an email that we process?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, and maybe to answer Stephen's question, when you're a smaller organization, there's a lot of technical challenges. When you become like a very scaled organization, it becomes like a organizational problem, and how to model it and summarize it in a way that makes sense to the business. I don't know if that's a fair way of assessing it, Steve.
Yeah. So that's the other thing that I think we've realized in recent times working on this is there's this thing called Conway's law, right? Where it states basically that communication structure of an organization, or the organizational structure, influences architecture, influences the interface, right? Which is of course true, but when it comes to governance, I have actually seen in the past the tendency to really organize everything based on who the manager is, or the human organizational structure, which is very accountability oriented approach. When of course we all want to have accountability, and but organization. But my observation, again, another personal observation, has been that I think organizations change faster than the architecture.
Yeah.
Once you have the software written, it's not gonna, the interface isn't gonna change, in response to some reorg, right? So whenever you're talking about things like budget or accountability, when you say so and so director is spending this much and so and so forth, the whole conversation really just becomes about organizational responsibility, right? Whereas architecture is slightly different. This director might used to own this two domains, but then this person may own more, or may even leave the company. So then what, right? So I think I am actually trying to help Qualtrics work with a structure that's more rooted in technical reality. So there's a personal organizational structure, but then we also have architectural domains and systems and components that make up the platform. And we really kind of talk about that kind of thing, where how much does it cost for us to send an email, in this domain, as opposed to how much budget is this so-and-so director spending a year? Is it going up or down? That kind of stuff. Because that way the conversation really becomes something about technology and efficiency of components and business value that's generated from it, and taking characters out of the equation. Right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of approaching it, because it's saying it's about the technology. Well, if you associate it with a person, it becomes a personal issue, and you can be viewed as an attack. I said, well, that emails cost whatever 1 cent per email, very high.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to how many microservices are we running and how efficiently are they running, as opposed to like who got the budget to spend on this or that. But I don't pretend that this is some sort of a industry opinion. It's just my personal opinion, actually. But it has taken about a couple of years, actually, within Qualtrics for us to start thinking about in these terms. And now I think people really want to track everything by domains instead of based on somebody's name.
That's interesting. Just kind of like following on from that, where we're talking about tracking the cost of each service or by domain. What is the role of tooling in this? You get a lot of tools that come on the market. What's your view on tooling and how it helps, or maybe how it doesn't help?
Right. I think tooling is very, very important for us to be organized and really track. There was, again, sort of AWS CTO Werner Borgel was talking about how having observability naturally just increases efficiency, right?
That's right.
Having an electricity meter on an apartment, just nothing else, just a meter, increases the efficiency of those residents, because they look at it and they see that they're using more electricity, right? And observability tools are, definitely, I think, primary tool that we need to put in place. And before, again, going back to organization and governance, I think having a strong, well-organized governance structure really helps people think about the metrics, So we are using at the moment Backstage IO based sort of a component catalog, but also the more important thing there is actually the rest of it. Is the organization ready to really sort of control their build process and pipeline to define components and services in some sort of a formal way, so that they are tracked and accounted for in a very automated way and accurate way, as opposed to in an ad hoc manner. So this is an area that I think we should invest more at Qualtrics. I think we could do a little bit better on improving our build pipeline, making sure that things are standardized there, so that we know we have much better control and governance of the microservice components.
I suppose, like, when we try to make improvements and tracking and standardization, there's always this age-old conundrum where you're dealing with like 100 different teams, and they're saying the priority is building features. What was Qualtrics' experience of balancing that versus the practicalities of making systems more reliable, more better observability, better cost efficiency?
Yeah, I think this is a natural tension that exists in every organization, where there's some engineering-driven initiatives or architecturally driven initiative versus product strategy, where we need to build features or change the change the product direction in one way. So I think it's a very natural tension. How do we resolve it? I think at Qualtrics, at least, we try to have very strong collaboration across product management, engineering, and UX to make group decision on how to prioritize these things. But selfishly, how do I push architectural initiatives or these cost optimization initiatives? First of all, as with everything, you need to get buy-in from the leadership as well as grassroots, right? We need to convince engineers that this is the reality of cloud engineering. As a cloud engineer, cost is actually not it is actually important quality of your output. Understanding the cost and controlling that it should be natural part of software development in the cloud. So there's the cultural aspect, educational aspect, cultural aspect. But when the rubber hits the road, people have to commit to how much feature do you want to deliver at the same time, improving the architecture or performing these initiatives. This is a question, believe it or not, I get all the time from team leads or engineers, like, how do I prioritize this? And my advice sometimes is, okay, well, if you stop making progress on these engineering initiatives, nothing's ever going to happen, and you're just going to be stuck with technical debt and pain forever, and it's going to get worse, right? So my advice would be to at least set aside, reserve certain capacity on the team, and you can, commit to certain amount to feature development, but also carve out certain capacity, and then you can prioritize within that capacity across engineering initiatives, whether it's cost optimization or paying down technical debt. That's a very tactical advice that I sometimes give, because it's very easy for people to have a black and white attitude about this. Because sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm the most like core team that has to deliver this, so I don't have time for anything else. So I'm just going to ignore technical debt issues." But that kind of attitude is, I think, going to eventually lead to such a bad situation from technical debt and other quality perspective that you're just going to be slower delivering the actual feature anyway. So it's to be healthy and set aside some time to do that stuff.
Yeah. Is there any guidance you can give on what's a reasonable amount of time to set aside for this?
Well, I think that's a very kind of honestly kind of case by case decision, but I would say 20-30% setting aside for engineering initiatives, I think usually is justified.
Yeah, I've heard the figure of 20% being used in the past, so I think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's that cultural aspect. What does that mean for you in terms of skills you need or new skills you need, or was that an issue as you moved into this microservices architecture into the cloud?
Oh yeah, definitely. There is a huge skills upgrade that more than people might realize that we need to ensure as an organization as you move into any cloud, right? Whether it's AWS or Azure, because there are just so many more knobs and levers that exist in the cloud that people should learn. But I think one of the interesting things that I thought was more learning than I had imagined at the beginning was Kubernetes, actually. So as we are auto scaling, the way to set the Kubernetes parameters just right to optimize the efficiency definitely is a learning. And as you know, Mansur, we've actually have a designated staff engineer whose
That's
job
right.
is to work with all the teams and aggregate all the learnings in one place, so that people who are auto-scaling with Kubernetes can go there and learn. But at our scale, I found that it's not simple, and sometimes the people can get these settings wrong, and may lead to resource saturation in production and cause incident. So it's a matter of a lot of learning in that, like Kubernetes.
Yeah. Actually, I think on Kubernetes, there's a tendency to believe that it's relatively easy to get the value out of it, but it's actually, I think the best analogy, it's like a multi-dimensional game of Tetris, especially at the scale that you're working at with like 100+ teams.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very, very challenging at scale. And so having some dedicated time to get that, and it doesn't have to be 100% right, even if you're like 70, 80% right, at least you're in a better position than being like 10% right, because the difference between 10% and 80% is huge in terms of value and in cost and reliability.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Just to, this is actually the point at which we question microservices.
let's start now.
It's a good idea to have these thousands of things that we need to, tune and optimize to get benefits, as opposed to a little bit higher, coarser granularity where we don't have to try to micro optimize. Well, microservices means micro optimization, right?
That is it. There's another question here from Sergio. In your experience, where do organizations most commonly miscalculate their ROI of microservices, and how should they rethink their approach? So I'll let you take that one first, and I'll answer it as well afterwards.
Yeah. No, I think microservices architecture is one of those concepts that you can just sit down and explain in 15 minutes with an engineer. And that's actually really resonates. It's easy to convince somebody to go down that route, especially with Dockers and containerization and things like that. But, you probably don't realize until maybe kind of knee deep into it that there are some downsides to it. I don't know if people actually go about calculating ROI in terms of dollar figures on architecture like this, but what I have found is that there are definitely certain downside in terms of reliability sometimes because of the network dependency, right? And there's the latency, performance issues, and reliability. The difficulty of distributed tracing, for example, is a cost. So all in all, it's not all good. There's a trade-off, and really I think the most essential thing in this approach is to come up with the correct granularity of services is more important. Now that we have 34 domains defined in Qualtrics, I think we are changing our policy slowly towards define your domain interfaces as best as you can, and then we won't care about what's behind it. So we are even, recommending consolidation of microservice behind the interface in some cases, just to make things a little bit more manageable and less micro optimization. So
I think, Sergio, to answer your question, too much micro. It's at what level of granularity you go at. And in the case of Qualtrics, where they're rapidly growing, it kind of made sense to maybe have lots of microservices. But if your organization's not growing as fast as that, and maybe you can sacrifice some of that granularity, then you'll get efficiencies. You'll get better efficiencies. You get better traceability and observability as well. In terms of absolute ROI, difficult to calculate, but I think what our experience is that if it's too granular, you tend to have a lot of waste and a lot of complexity. So I think it's getting that granularity right. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Steve. I think, yeah.
So the other thing that I would like to balance this with though is we've had monolith.
Yeah, that's worse.
At Qualtrics, and we've over time actually took the original monolith we had and refactored it into 18 different microservices. We have many more microservices other than that. So I would say at the scale of enterprise platform like Qualtrics, monolith is actually not an option either, right?
Yeah.
So really, I think the trick is to define the right capability domain boundaries, and choosing the right architecture within each domain is, I think, the direction that we are headed towards.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time. Like maybe we can summarize some of the key points there. So Steve, first of all, that's really insightful. Again, a view on how microservices, how run microservices and architecture in the cloud, especially at the scale that Qualtrics is at. I think there's like a lot of things here to pick out, but the ones I've picked out here was like what you mentioned about Gen AI. Actually, that's super interesting. That actually we it creates a lot of things that we need to think about there. That we in terms of the creation of new workloads, and that means the underlying products and platforms need to be pretty sound. I think the area of the level of granularity on microservices, that's an interesting thing. It sounds like Qualtrics is almost trying to reverse that level of granularity to make things easier. And those things will make cost easier to manage, but still have the autonomy in the teams. So I think there's some good learnings, and I hope the people listening have found this session useful. Feel free to drop any further questions to myself. I'll try and answer them. But Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on to share your story and experiences. I'm hoping that we don't have to wait another 30 years before our next audio event. Before you can do sooner than that.
Well, yeah, it was an absolute pleasure for me as well, Mansoor, and it's always a pleasure to work with you. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience for listening.